Welcome to the PR Essentials Summit series, where the experts reveal how to do PR so that you can do it yourself. Hello, and welcome to the panel on multicultural marketing and PR. Not going to get it right. If the target market for your brand is diverse and has specific influence with different cultural backgrounds, then you can't come up with a mainstream marketing strategy and expect it to work. Today, Elizabeth Barrutia, founder and CEO of Barú Marketing and Media, a multicultural marketing agency, was joining us to talk about multicultural marketing, the nuances and the differences in every market, and what you need to plan for. She has a 20-year career in general and Hispanic markets. She's an industry innovator, multicultural marketing media, and Elizabeth has designed campaigns for more than 120 feature films for Walt Disney Studios, Focus Features, Universal Pictures, and more. Welcome, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for joining us at the PR Essential Summit today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ranjini. It's really nice to be here today.
Thanks. There's a lot of tongue twisters in here, so please excuse my verbiage today. But I'm very excited to kind of present this idea. You know, what we do is very mainstream startup tech PR, but I think a lot of companies have the need of specialized marketing, and I love your background and experience, and I can't wait for you to share. I would love for maybe just a quick background on the agency and exactly what you do. The paraphrasing version, but exactly what you guys do in the markets that you serve.
Yeah, absolutely. So Barú Marketing and Media is truly an audience-inclusive advertising and media agency. And we serve clients that really run the gamut, large and small. Large clients such as Covered California, which offers affordable health care to all Californians, to the California Department of Public Health. Nickelodeon is one of our clients, Universal Studios Hollywood. And then we have smaller family-owned businesses such as Del Real Foods, for example, and O'Neill Vintners, for example, that really develop wonderful niche wines for select target audiences. So I think that there's a lot that I can share with you today from our agency's background and experience, whether it be creative positioning and strategy, or if it's media planning and buying that you're interested in learning about. We have a wealth of knowledge that we're happy to share today.
Yeah, I think even now, like also in the temperament of today's social environment, right? You have to be super sensitive. And maybe not just sensitive, but a lot of new companies, new startups, new entrepreneurs are targeting niche markets because of the way things are. So we're seeing a lot more minority startup owners, and we're seeing small business owners pop up everywhere with different nuances and different directions. And I think it's important to understand that different audiences do need a different message. And that's something I think people maybe don't see as much, but now that we're seeing a lot of culturally different organizations, we're kind of coming up against that. What do you think that, some of these startups and these businesses, what do you think, what should they consider when creating a separate marketing plan or strategy? Or maybe it's not even a separate, maybe it's just a more focused. Like, how do you start the process of figuring out who to market to?
Well, I think first and foremost, whatever the brand might be or the company might be, they need to really understand their positioning in the market and their opportunity with select segments. If there's tremendous opportunity, if they have a specific offering, service offering that we know will be of value and a benefit to select target audiences, for example, the Hispanic market or African American audiences, or even Asian Pacific Islander audiences, then it's really important to make sure that you're crafting one that is going to be very targeted and nuanced. That's going to speak to them culturally and also linguistically, of course. But it goes deeper than that. It's not just about crafting the right message for the market. It's also knowing where those different audiences consume their media as well, right? Because you mentioned social media, Ranjini. Social is amazing, especially right now since everybody is at home and on multiple devices from home. Social has seen an even greater boost than it had previously, which by the way, social media always performed extremely well against multicultural audiences, but now even more so because we have a little more disposable time on our hands to be able to swipe up or swipe left and right. So positioning first and foremost, I think, is really important, but really understanding what that service offering is, and then making sure that when you do hone in on what that positioning is for that service offering, figuring out how you're going to target that audience. Are you going to target them best in social? Are you going to target them better in radio? Are you going to be able to drive traffic to your website or to your storefront or to your 1-800 number, depending on what it is what are those key metrics that you're trying to move, right?
Yeah, I'm going to go off the script a little bit and just ask you, because this just came up in my mind as you were talking. You're talking about radio and social and all this stuff. How do you know when you need to be creating messages in multiple languages too? I think I feel like that's another thing.
Right. Well, I think, again, it depends on the client. It depends on the product and what your service offering is.
Mm-hmm.
Many times, you have the opportunity, if there's budget allows for it, then you can do a segmentation study and you can really understand the complexities of your audience and your consumer base. A lot of companies don't have the budget for segmentation studies, though. And I think that that's where you can turn to tools such as your own Facebook Insights and your own Google Analytics to try and figure out the most data and really analyze that data to understand better who your consumer is. If you have a service offering that requires a 1-800 number, one of our big points of concern is if you can't service them in language, then you shouldn't be speaking to them in language. But if you can service them in language, if you have the ability through a call center to really offer that extra assistance, then absolutely be ready for it. Also, be ready for it on your website as well. Make sure that your website is able to be multilingual or at least bilingual if you're going to be speaking to those audiences in another language.
Do you have any tools that help you do that? Do you know any, like, offhand? I mean, this is kind of a random question, but I feel like there's some type of tools that can help you translate and things like that. Are there any like quick hacks for stuff like that for people who are just like kind of testing the waters?
Sure. I mean, there are a million hacks out there for translation websites. The only caveat that I would say with that is that what's so important, specifically when you're marketing a new product, you need to really be authentic and you have to have a true voice. And oftentimes those translations, even Google Translate, the services, they've gotten better over the years, but they're not perfect. Mm-hmm. And so a lot can be missed. A lot of nuance can be missed culturally on how things are truly said. There can be errors as well. So you want to pay special attention to your in-language messaging and make sure that you hire an expert. Translations oftentimes don't work because that sentiment or heart that you're trying to convey doesn't come through. So if you have the ability, my recommendation would be you could start with a translation service like a Google Translate or one of another app, but then run it by someone who truly is a specialist in the marketplace, who truly is someone who can know the adaptive nature of language and tell you, yes, this is correct, or perhaps there's a better way to say it. We find often that our clients come to us for translations and we go back to them and we say, we're sorry, but this actually doesn't really translate well perfectly. It needs to be culturally adapted for it to have the same type of like emotional resonance that you're creating in your English language copy.
Yeah, and you see a lot of those, like sometimes historically I've seen, you see those campaigns that like said something like like Chevy Nova, like that whole idea of not really translating exactly what you mean. Nova here is like a supernova, and nova in a Spanish language doesn't make sense. So I think that's a lesson. That's a good lesson. And we get a lot of clients. So we get a lot of international clients, but they're coming into the English language. And then you're seeing a lot of crazy, like just, because English is so complicated, you're seeing a lot of things not being fully said in the correct way. So it's like, a lot of connecting verbs and things like that are missing. A lot of usually it has to do with like female, male, innotations. So I think that's definitely a good point, and a good thing to know. If you're not, language isn't a toe dipping activity, basically.
No, it's not. It's fully immersive, and you need to be able to commit to having somebody who is an expert in the language.
Yeah.
Don't rely on someone who sort of speaks Spanish or sort of speaks Chinese. You want to have somebody who really has a mastery of the language.
No, that totally makes sense. So what do you think are like kind of the most important, maybe best practices when you're starting to create a program? What for you in your world, like what kind of like is I guess a basic framework? What are the best practices of what you need?
Right. So I think first and foremost, you really have to understand the cultural context of what you're walking into, right? Especially right now in this year, 2020 has been such a wild, crazy year. And it's been challenging for many of us. And there's been a lot of growth opportunity that's come out of 2020 as well, I feel, for many businesses. I think that understanding the cultural context and how today's scenario and what today's landscape can mean for you is super important as a brand. So understanding what the benefits are, and also understanding what those challenges are going to be. What's the competitive? So you want to think about the cultural truth of today. You want to think about the competitive set, who's out there in the marketplace with similar products that you might offer, or brand services that you might offer. So understand the culture, understand the competitive, understand your own context of where you are truly, so you can really figure out strategically where you are today and where you want to be, in the next 6 months, in the next year and a half. Give yourself some milestones, give yourself the time to get there, because it doesn't happen overnight. You can't build a multicultural marketing strategy and expect it to be effective, in a matter of months.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly can be, but it's not always a guarantee. And so I think that you really have to understand those 4 C's, as we like to say, right?
This is great. I love the way you're positioning this, and it's kind of making me wonder, you're working with a lot of film. It looks like you guys have a lot of entertainment background too. Like, what are the nuances? Like, how do you, and this is another off the script question, but how do you guys typically work with, like, let's say you have multiple audiences. You've got, for a movie, you have an American audience, maybe you have a Spanish or Latin audience, maybe you have a European audience. How do you make that transition, and where do you guys come in? Like, how do you kind of translate that, or do you do all of them? Do you work on all of them, or you just kind of translate to whatever market that you're working on? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's loaded for sure. Yeah. So we have certain accounts and clients that they come to us and they say, this is what we're doing in the English language general market to reach everybody here in the United States. How can you help us with these Spanish language marketing considerations? And so we'll go out and we'll build that for them. There are other studio partners that we work with who come to us for their total market strategy, their general market strategy, right? And they do that because they know that we understand multicultural market implicitly. And so they trust us because multicultural is basically the mainstream today, right? And so what we're finding more and more is, where we started as a multicultural first agency, now we are quickly becoming the norm. We're quickly becoming the agency that they go to when they need inclusive strategies. And so that's why I started this conversation off by saying that first and foremost, we're an audience inclusive agency. I think 2020 again is the year of inclusivity, where we're really seeing great strides that have been made. And we hope to continue pushing that conversation forward. So to answer specifically your question about how that's done, I think if you in entertainment have the opportunity to really showcase diversity in cast and inclusivity in cast, then we do so at the very forefront. So that's in a very easy thing to do, right? If you're given the tools. In other business lines where you might not have a cast to put forward, you want to make sure that you have the right spokespeople, or you're looking at behind the scenes. Who are the innovators of the products that perhaps that you're creating? Who are those people whose stories you can tell and bring to life that are really going to show that diversity that is really reflective of our society today?
Yeah, as you're saying, I'm thinking, oh, this is just diversity and inclusion. That's everybody now. Pretty much everybody. And everyone, and a lot of companies are, looking to pull and extract that diversity and inclusion. Do you guys also do that as well? Do you find the stories and then bring them to the forefront?
We do, and we've done that for a very long time, since the very beginning of our work over 13 years ago. For some of our wine accounts, what that has meant is when they have gone, I've got a great case study, in fact, that I'll share with you really quickly. We were working with Barrutia wine estates, and they wanted to launch White Zinfandel among the Latino marketplace. And we said to them, great, fantastic. Give us all the tools and assets that you have, and we'll do an evaluation. They said, well, we really don't have anything to reach the Hispanic marketplace. You're starting at ground zero. And we said, all right, well, let's try and unfold, what this product can mean to the consumer first. And let's figure out who you have in your arsenal that we can lean on to tell that story. Well, it turned out they were sitting on a gold mine. They had no idea that their chief winemaker was a woman from Mexico City. And so we were able to bring her story to life and talk about her history, her very rich history in learning all about enology and the elaboration of wines. And so we built an entire campaign where she became our brand ambassador. We were able to train her.
Wow.
With her media training, and she was able to do it in language, in both Spanish and in English. And it was fantastic. Not every company is going to always have that type of opportunity, but the point is that don't be afraid to look within your own resources first and foremost, and try and find a way to bring those stories to come to life.
Yeah. And it seems like that was the most authentic way also to bring it out, right? Instead of getting someone externally, you guys looked internally to find that they were just sitting on someone that can make it real. But being a winemaker, that person can tell the story very naturally, I think, right?
Right. And I think you bring up a really important point. Authenticity is so important with multicultural marketing. You need to be able to speak to the audience in a voice that is going to be relatable and understandable, that is not going to be elusive. And so you want somebody who's really approachable, right?
I'm a little scared to put you on the kind of what's it called? Put you on the spot. But that kind of brings up a question. Have you ever seen something, and I'm sure you have, I'm sure you've got some kind of case study that has backfired, not for you, but just in general as an industry? What has been one of the things, like marketing campaigns, that have backfired from poor execution?
Right. Well, the Dove campaign got a lot of backlash, right? If you recall that one, where it was talking about the color of people's skin, that was challenging. I think during the police brutality riots several years ago, Pepsi had a moment where it was
of course
a bit cringy, right? Because they were trying to leverage the cultural context of today, but it felt disingenuous. And it didn't bode well with younger generations who really spoke up on social media, and they got a lot of heat for it. And so Pepsi actually apologized profusely for it, and they've moved on since, obviously.
Right.
But not every company has the luxury and deep pockets that Pepsi can afford, right? So I think that those are all really great kind of case studies of what to do and what not to do. I think authenticity is super important, but it's also writing that fine line, especially in a cultural context of multiculturalism, right? Because you want to make sure that you're not stereotyping. You want to make sure that you're not falling into old tropes when you're thinking about speaking to an audience in language. But at the same time, it's writing that fine line to make sure that you're also hitting on a cultural nuance or an insight that you know will resonate with the market. You've
hit a few interesting points that come from different backgrounds, and not just, I guess I think maybe we should have started this interview with a definition of what is multiculturalism, because I think that has to do with, for me, it's like literally a cultural country, different countries and that kind of culturalism, which is obviously there. But then you mentioned the generation multiculturalism. So what would the definition of multiculturalism actually mean?
I'm not sure I mentioned the generation of multiculturalism, but I do want to speak to the fact that, yeah, you're right. I mean, today America is multicultural. 1 in 3 children are Latino. It's amazing to see the rise in population among the API audiences as well, right? And Black audiences now more than ever have a voice that is really truly being heard. So multiculturalism is here and at the forefront of everything that we should all be thinking about, regardless of the brand, as long as you feel like you have a service offering. So multiculturalism, I think, is the most audience inclusive way of thinking about our marketing strategies. We also, at our agency, talk about cross-culturalism, right? So not to pivot on you, but the cross-culturalism is basically where you see the effect of, for example, the Latino marketplace on the mainstream marketplace. Tortillas are more popular than bread, for example. Salsa
Right.
outsells ketchup. There's a reason why 15 or 17 of the top 25 Billboard songs are in Spanish language or bilingual songs. So there's a lot of influence in cross-culturalism that needs to be considered. And if your brand has the opportunity to tag on to that moment, to grapple onto that moment, then that's tremendous, because there's a huge wave of endorsement that can be ridden with that.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was thinking, cross-culturalism. And I think sometimes I get caught up in the definition of like, what is the definition of one over the other? But I think that's more of what I was thinking of. It's actually, intersection now of all these things all the time.
And that intersectionality to work across cultures to make sure that you're really pulling on the right levers across all the different audience segments is so important to really kind of dig your hands into.
No, that's so cool. So what do you think are, like, when you are building a toolkit, when you're building a strategy, what do you think are the must-haves? Like I am a brand that I have a mainstream brand and I'm just trying to target my niche market. Let's just say it's the Latin market. What are like kind of the basics of how to get started? What are the basic tools I need? And obviously a very good translator. An expert translator.
If you're going to do in-language work, right? Oftentimes you don't necessarily need in-language work depending on what your service offering is. Again,
okay, yeah.
Your product offering is. But so I think first and foremost, understand your company truth. Understand who you are. Understand the cultural truth of today, where we're living, and the context, how you're going to be speaking to them. Mm-hmm. And when you understand those 3 things, then it's going to be able to really guide you on a path to build a positioning statement that will work. Mm-hmm. Once you have a solid positioning statement, that's internal. That's for you as an organization to really rally behind. Then you want to talk about those consumer truths. What's going to really matter to the consumer the most, right? Mm-hmm. So understand your culture, understand your company, understand the opportunity, and then the competition. You're going to want to understand the competition, and then you can build that rally cry that's external for the consumer. I think that.
Do you typically create like multiple positioning statements for one brand?
Usually what we'll do is we will have an umbrella positioning statement that will work multiculturally speaking. And then as we dig deeper into the segments, we might nuance it ever so slightly, right? Our Covered California campaign right now is a tremendous example of this, in fact, because for Covered California, for example, the English language tagline is this way to health insurance. Mm-hmm. But for us, we couldn't say this way to health insurance in Spanish. And so we realized that we had to kind of nuance it a bit. And so for us, it meant directo a tu salud, which is directly to your health. Like we're more concerned about taking you directly to a solution that will offer you health services versus pointing people in the right direction.
Right.
Right.
No, that's a great example.
It's those subtle nuances. So universally, the platform worked. This way to health insurance worked in Spanish, but it wasn't necessarily adaptable, right? And so we needed to, or excuse me, it wasn't necessarily translatable. It was adaptable, but not translatable. So we really needed to kind of think about how we could be more intentional with the language and the strategy.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. I love it. What are, and this is the same thing. I guess this is kind of, you might have answered this question, but I guess critical mistakes to avoid when you're doing things, or maybe not mistakes to avoid, because you did just mention kind of one is translating it properly. But I guess things to consider that you should consider that maybe you haven't thought of, you know?
Right. Well, again, going back to the stereotypes, which we see far too often, I highly recommend that you test your creative or your positioning, and it doesn't have to be expensive consumer testing. It can be, a group of people that you test on Google surveys, for example. Sorry.
Make sure everybody's awake. We want to make sure everyone's awake.
Sorry about that, everybody. So it could be putting your positioning statements or your creative or your positioning, whatever it is that you're trying to put out into market. You can test it on a Google survey with a tight-knit group of people, friends and family. You can do it outside of that. You can do very inexpensively some testing within Google. It will offer you survey results that are fairly easy to do. And that can help give a lot of guidance for you to listen. I think that is the biggest part about learning who your consumer set is and what your opportunity is to really learn how to listen to the research.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. Yeah. So there's so many questions I just have. One of the last questions I'm kind of coming up on was, we mentioned social media before. Is there a different, and I guess I'm talking to the Latin market, but any other markets that you're familiar with, is there a different influencer dynamic in these markets? Like the way we use influencers in PR today and mommy bloggers and things like that in like the American market, we use it a very specific way. Are there different dynamics, or is it all pretty much the same thing, just in a different language or different cultural nuances?
I think, you need to understand the target demographic that you're reaching, right? Mm-hmm. Your mommy blogger set is going to be very different than your millennial urban consumer set, for example, right? So yeah, I think that there's a plethora of amazing influencers, micro influencers, and very large influencers that you can reach out to. And it really just depends on who the audience is that you're trying to reach.
Have you found that some demographics use influencers more than others, or do you think it's pretty straight across the board? I mean, I have never worked with influencers in different languages. So I guess that's really what I'm asking, is kind of like, is that game as prominent in other cultures or other backgrounds that you've seen as it is for our regular mainstream English?
Yeah, I think influencers work across the board because it really is as close to an endorsement as you can get.
Yeah.
Right? I think when we think of influencers, we often think of social influencers. And so to answer your question is, are they the same demographics? They're going to change, obviously, depending on your generation. So typically what we find is the social influencers that are using tend to be a little bit younger, a little more contemporary, but there's a lot of parental influencers as well now that are, the mom bloggers, like you had said, probably reaching up into their early 40s even. But We don't think of influencers only as social influencers at our agency. We also think of influencers who can be community influencers in the marketplace. And I think when you talk about, cultural marketing and multicultural marketing, so much of what we do is local and in the community. And it's super important to understand those pockets, right? Because there can be local community influencers can range from radio DJs, for example, who people really trust, to even local faith-based organizations who the pastors or the preachers might be the influencers in that particular case. So you never know who you're going to go to until you actually do your audience analysis of who you're trying to reach. But I find that local community influencers can be highly effective when you're talking to, multicultural subsets.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Now that you say it out loud. Totally makes a lot of sense. So startups and small businesses are very, very results driven. And I'm sure when you work with small businesses, I'm sure large businesses too, everybody wants to know what the ROI is. Like, how do I measure success? And obviously one way could be like sales or however, that actual dollar metric. But what are the different measurement tools that you guys use to measure success? What are you looking at when you want to see if your campaign actually worked, I guess?
Right. I mean, I think for us, we have tools at our fingertips, right? So there's a lot of different things that we can do. We can do brand lift studies, for example, to see if the campaign has been effective in generating more awareness. You can do those through Facebook. You can do those through Google. You can hire third-party organizations such as Millward Brown, for example, to do those brand lift studies for you to make sure that you are truly, being effective with your reach and increasing your awareness. But in addition to that, I think there's a lot of basic things like you had mentioned, measuring your ROI by overlaying your sales versus your output, your spend, to see if there's a correlation between how much you're spending and how, what your inbound lead generation is. So lead generation is a really important part of any small business. We like to have a minimum 30% benchmark, right? For every 10 leads that you might try and solicit, to get at least 3 final bids or 3 final
sales or whatever the metric is. Yeah.
Options, right. Whatever your metric is. I think that the most important part for any organization is to really understand what your metrics are going to be. Before you start looking for that ROI, you really have to make sure that you're aligned internally as an organization with your internal communications and your external communications with any stakeholders that you might have brought on board to make sure that everybody is in agreement on what your key performance metrics are going to be. Is it going to be your sales? Is it going to be awareness? Mm-hmm. Is it going to be just the lead generation, the start of a lead? Is it just submitting an application and not following through? What is considered a conversion? Some organizations consider a conversion to be the final sale or getting through to the very end of the purchase funnel. Other organizations consider intent to be a huge win. If somebody has an idea towards purchase intent, and if you can really measure that, then a lot of organizations find that to be successful enough for them. So,
and these metrics, you're setting them up as you're building the campaign. So this is happening at the very beginning. You already know what you're going to measure at the end, right?
That's right. You should be setting up those metrics when you're building out your strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is I feel like that's one of the most difficult things, because everybody wants the world, right? When they're launching or they're spending money on a marketing campaign. So I like that 30% return. That's a really good number to kind of just at least go by to make you at least get a little bit of an idea of a metric of what you should be looking at.
Right. I mean, and that's the baseline benchmark that for, a startup or a new business, right?
Right.
Certainly, as you continue to evolve as a business, you always want to accelerate and increase upon that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, no, That's a lot. That's a lot. Is there anything I missed about multicultural marketing that people should know? Anybody should know when they're diving into either a new business or a new market?
I think that, you know, again, really doing your homework, really doing your research, making sure that you are being as genuine and authentic as you possibly can, while at the same time listening to voices from those communities. That's the most important part. Make sure that you have good advisors, a good panel of people that are trusted resources to you that can help guide you in the right direction if you're not already from that community yourself.
Right. That's excellent.
Even if you are part of that community, sorry to interrupt, but even if you are part of the community, you're still going to want, backup. You're going to want other people to chime in. For example, I'm Latina, but there are a lot of people out there who might not necessarily agree with the positioning statement that I might write. I want to make sure I have consensus on my team.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah. I'm not the only voice in my community. Especially for me, because I have like so many layers on mine. I'm like a first generation Indian American, and it's, so different than maybe somebody who is an immigrant, so yeah, you have a lot of layers to these different communities and pockets.
Well, I think that one thing that's super important to consider if you're working with small budgets is if you have a product that is, fairly multicultural and diverse in its nature. If you don't have a huge budget, look and lean into the segment that you feel has the strongest and greatest potential. And that way you can really make your dollars work harder against that one segment and see if it works well for you first before trying to do everything, trying to reach everybody with unique messages. A great example of that is something that we're doing for one of our wine clients right now. I can't speak to the specificity of it, but what I can say is it's a wine client that the wine has been in market for over 30 years. They realize that there's an opportunity that's untapped within the Hispanic millennial set. And not a lot of wines are targeted towards the Hispanic millennial set. And so they came to us and they said, listen, you do all of our multicultural marketing, all of our total marketing. Can you help us build a brand positioning statement and an action plan for the Hispanic millennial audience against this? And so we've completely taken this brand and we're repositioning it. And we're not, completely changing what the product is at all. The name of the product is staying the same. The color palette is staying the same. The label is staying the same. But it's how we're presenting it to the Hispanic marketplace is completely different than how it was presented before. And what we're doing is we're trying to harness what we were talking about earlier, that cross-culturalism, right? So we're trying to lean into the segment that we think that this wine brand has the most opportunity with, because about 35% of wine drinkers are Hispanic millennial. So against this particular varietal. So we're leaning into that very heavily and making a Hispanic millennial first brand for them. And from that, what we're hoping for is that there'll be a lot of cross-culturalism that comes with it and influence from the Latino marketplace into the general marketplace.
I kind of see, and you're using wine, so I'm going to use this parallel, but I feel like Stella Rosa kind of also did that a little bit. They tried to do that. Well, they tried, and now they have these like sub-brands and things like that. And because in LA, you see the billboards everywhere. So it's kind of like, I think that's really interesting to be able to like lean into it and just be like, okay, we're just going to go after this and see if it works.
Right. And Stella Rosa did an amazing, amazing job with everything. And you're right. They proved to build a great success story with that. They've done really well.
Yeah.
So that would be a great recommendation for an organization that might not have a tremendous amount of budget, but really wants to see if they can do, cultural marketing well. You don't have to do everything all at once. Pick one segment.
Yeah. I want to thank you. Thank you so much for your time and all this input, because it's like a lot of stuff that I would not have said because I'm not in this background. It's so much to consider when you're talking to different audiences, and I really appreciate your time. How can people find you?
You can find me on my website. You can always reach out to the info address on our website. The address is Barú, BARU-ad.com, and reach out to us there. And we'd love to engage in a conversation. And my apologies for my barking dog. His name is Mochi, and he's about this big, but he has huge personality.
Yeah, a big bark, small bite.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, thank you so much. And I really appreciate having you. I'm excited. If you guys have any questions, you can pass them along to me. I'm happy to pass them along to Elizabeth, or you can, of course, contact her directly at our website. And I'll make sure you have all the information as we follow up with everyone who joined us in our panel today. Thank you very much and have a fantastic day.
Thank you. Bye.